In a world continually shaped by unforeseen geopolitical events and economic complexities, the Israel-Hamas conflict emerges as a critical focal point with far-reaching implications for both the global economy and the nation of India. This clash, which commenced in October as Hamas launched a surprise attack on Israeli population centers, is not an isolated event. Rather, it unfolds against the backdrop of an already tumultuous global landscape, notably marked by the Russian invasion of Ukraine earlier in the year. The Russia-Ukraine war had a profound impact on the global economic ecosystem, leading to a surge in energy prices, a worldwide food shortage, and unsettling inflation. It had already disrupted the world's efforts to recover from the COVID-19 pandemic. In the wake of this conflict, global economic growth has begun to slow, and inflation rates have become unpredictable. However, the Israel-Hamas conflict, which may appear geographically isolated, has the potential to escalate in ways that could reverberate throughout the world. This escalation could in turn introduce a new layer of complexity impacting India's economy, an emerging global player in its own right. As a substantial importer of crude oil, India is directly vulnerable to the volatility of global oil markets, with implications for trade balances, inflation rates, and fiscal stability. Let's go deep into the multifaceted impact of the Israel-Hamas conflict, exploring its ramifications for both global economy and India. We will look into the potential scenarios, the consequences for various economic sectors, and the uncertainty it introduces into India's economic growth trajectory. At a time when the global economy is already grappling with the aftermath of a significant war and the aftermath of a pandemic, the Israel-Hamas conflict poses fresh challenges that call for economic resilience, adaptability, and vigilance. What is the current situation in the Middle East regarding the Israel-Hamas conflict, and why does it matter for the global economy? The Israel-Hamas conflict is a recent development in the volatile Middle East. It began in October when Hamas launched a surprise attack on Israeli population centers, resulting in retaliatory airstrikes. The conflict has claimed lives, caused destruction, and increased geopolitical tensions in the region. The conflict is significant for the global economy because it adds a fresh layer of complexity to an already challenging landscape. The world has been grappling with the aftermath of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, which commenced in February 2022. This earlier conflict involved two major players, Russia, which is a significant energy producer, and Ukraine. The ramifications included higher energy prices, global food shortages, and inflation. The global economy was just beginning to recover from the COVID-19 pandemic, and this new conflict has the potential to exacerbate existing economic difficulties. How did the Russia-Ukraine war impact the global economy, and what is the current state of global economic growth and inflation? The Russia-Ukraine conflict had profound implications for global economy. It led to a surge in energy prices, a worldwide food shortage, and inflation. This conflict significantly slowed down the growth of both developed and emerging economies. As of the most recent estimates, global economic growth is expected to decelerate from 3.5% in 2022 to 3% in 2023 and further to 2.9% in 2024. These figures fall well below the historical average of 3.8%, highlighting the current challenges to economic expansion. Inflation initially surged following the Russian invasion, reaching 9.2%. Central banks around the world responded by raising interest rates to combat higher prices, which subsequently lowered inflation to 5.9% in 2023. The International Monetary Fund projected that inflation might further decline to 4.8% in 2024. However, these projections did not account for the Israel-Hamas conflict, which could introduce new elements of uncertainty into the global economic landscape. What are the potential global repercussions of the Israel-Hamas conflict, and how does it affect the global economy under different scenarios? The Israel-Hamas conflict could have various repercussions on the global economy depending on its scope and severity. In the best case scenario, if the conflict remains confined to Israel and the Palestinian territories, its impact on the global economy may be limited. It might not significantly alter oil prices, inflation rates, or growth prospects. In a more concerning scenario, if the conflict escalates to include multiple fronts such as Gaza and West Bank, Syria and Lebanon, along with wider unrest in the Middle East, oil prices could rise by $8 per barrel, inflation could increase by 0.2 percentage points, and growth could slow down by 0.3 points. However, in the worst case scenario, if a direct war breaks out between Israel and Iran, coupled with unrest in the broader Middle East, oil prices could surge by an additional $64 per barrel, reaching a staggering $150 per barrel. Inflation could rise by 1.2 points and GDP growth could fall by 1 point. This worst-case scenario presents a bleak economic outlook. How does the Israel-Hamas conflict affect India's economy, particularly in terms of crude oil prices and the Indian rupee? The Israel-Hamas conflict has direct implications for India's economy, primarily due to its status as a major importer of crude oil. Raising oil prices impact India's imports bill, potentially resulting in a trade deficit and exerting pressure on the country's current account balance. India must spend more on oil imports as prices rise, affecting its economic stability. The conflict indirectly influences India by affecting the global market. If the conflict escalates and impacts major oil producers in the region such as Iran and Saudi Arabia, it could lead to supply disruptions which in turn can result in higher crude oil prices. India, heavily reliant on oil imports, could be significantly affected. Furthermore, as India pays for oil imports in dollars, higher oil import bills could increase the demand for dollars, potentially weakening the Indian rupee against the dollar. What are the potential consequences for Indian industries, inflation, fiscal deficit and government subsidies due to the rising oil prices? Rising oil prices have a cascading impact on various sectors within India's economy. The increased cost of production and higher energy costs for businesses and households result in elevated inflation. This in turn could undermine the efforts of central banks to control inflation, leading them to raise interest rates, which slows down the global economic growth. Moreover, the Indian government often subsidizes fuel prices to shield consumers from the full impact of rising oil prices. If crude oil prices remain high, the government may need to increase subsidies or absorb some of the price increases, which could widen the fiscal deficit. The fiscal deficit, expressed as the percentage of the country's GDP, could rise. To put it simply, the government covers the gap between the market price and the controlled price of oil and gas products like kerosene, diesel and liquefied petroleum gas. This practice is likely to exacerbate the fiscal deficit, further affecting the country's financial health. How does the Israel-Hamas conflict impact the India-Middle East-Europe economic corridor and the Indian rupee? The Israel-Hamas conflict introduces challenges for the India-Middle East-Europe Economic Corridor project, a significant initiative aiming to connect India and Europe through the Middle East. If the region becomes further embroiled in the conflict, the India-Middle East-Europe Economic Corridor project could be delayed or jeopardized. The conflict also has a depreciating effect on the Indian rupee, potentially leading to inflation and affecting consumer spending. A weaker rupee makes Indian exports more expensive and can thwart the Reserve Bank of India from reducing interest rates, which could have made retail consumer loans cheaper. In essence, the rupee's depreciation can have a ripple effect on multiple aspects of the Indian economy. How have global stock markets reacted to the Israel-Hamas conflict, and what is the impact on trade between India and Israel? The global stock markets initially reacted with volatility when the Israel-Hamas conflict began. Investors withdrew their investments, particularly from emerging markets including India. The Indian stock market experienced significant fluctuations, and on October 23, the Bombay Stock Exchange Sensex recorded its largest single session loss since July. As for trade between India and Israel, it has been growing steadily, with India exporting goods and services to Israel. However, the extent of the impact on this trade relationship depends on the duration of the conflict and whether the entire region becomes embroiled in the war. The situation is further complicated by the fact that the United Arab Emirates, a significant trading partner for India, could be affected if the conflict in the Middle East escalates. What are the implications of Israel-Hamas conflict on India's economic growth and its ability to sustain its post-pandemic recovery? The Israel-Hamas conflict adds another layer of complexity to the challenges India faces in sustaining its post-pandemic recovery. India had shown resilience in the face of the COVID-19 pandemic, registering a growth rate of 7.8% in the previous fiscal year. However, the ongoing wars and the uncertainties introduce additional risks to India's economic outlook. Most agencies have already revised down India's growth projections for the current fiscal year, estimating it to be close to 6%. Given the prevailing geopolitical disruptions, India's ability to maintain its recovery, especially in the light of the current developments, is uncertain. The world had overcome the natural calamity of the COVID-19 pandemic, but human-made challenges like war present a different and formidable obstacle. The Israel and Hamas conflict, when viewed through the lens of the global economy economy represents a compounding of crises that have already strained the world's economic resilience. It follows closely on the heels of the Ukraine-Russia war, further complicating the global economic landscape. The conflict introduces uncertainties and its potential scenarios range from limited impact to severe economic repercussions depending on its scope and geographic extent. For India, as a significant importer of crude oil, this conflict directly affects its economy. The rise in oil prices impacts its import bill, trade balance, and currency stability. The conflict indirectly influences the Indian economy by affecting the global oil market and its implications for crude oil prices. This has consequences for various sectors including industries, inflation, fiscal deficit, and government subsidies. Furthermore, the impact on the India-Middle East-Europe economic corridor and the depreciation of the Indian rupee add to the complexity of India's economic outlook. Global stock markets have exhibited volatility and trade relationships are at risk, particularly if the conflict escalates across the Middle East. In the end, the Israel-Hamas conflict presents a formidable challenge for India's post-pandemic recovery. It comes at a time when the global economy is already navigating difficult waters and the ability to sustain growth remains uncertain. The world has successfully confronted natural calamities like the pandemic, but the challenges posed by human-made conflicts demand a different order of resilience and adaptability. The path forward for India as for the global economy remains uncertain, and vigilance is paramount in these unpredictable times. Thank you for tuning in. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, share it with your friends, drop a comment below with your thoughts, and don't forget to subscribe for more content like this. Your support means the world to me.